57 million people died last year. With the baby boomer generation reaching the end of their natural lifespan, that number will only grow and continue to grow. After all, with a larger population comes more death, even ignoring current events. England alone is predicted to run out of space within 20 years. This is a serious and growing problem, as graveyards are filling up and running out of space, and we only have so much available land. First, today we'll look at the problem of running out of grave space, then the reasons we're running out of grave space, and finally, we'll look at what we can do to minimize the physical and environmental impact left by death. First, the lack of graveyard space is a worldwide issue. There's a rough estimate of approximately 140,000 acres used for graveyards in the US alone. I say this is an extremely rough estimate because there's any number of unmarked graves, family plots, graveyards for towns that have disappeared. There's any number of reasons, basically, why a grave site might not be known about. Additionally, there are several countries that are just out of space. I mentioned England at the beginning of this speech. However, they're off pretty lightly compared to other parts of Europe. Other parts of Europe have already had to switch how they do graves because there's no space. For example, Germany, Spain, Greece, and Italy all have all switched more or less entirely to systems where you rent a grave, kind of like an apartment building, but for graves. See, what you do is you rent the plot for about 5 years. It varies place by place, but generally what I saw, around 5 years, which is probably enough time for the body to become bone, but not dust. At this point, after that 5 years is up, your family can choose to continue renting the plot. If they choose not to rent the plot for an additional amount of time, the bones are returned to the family, and a different body is moved into the plot. Like I said, kind of like an apartment building, but for bodies. Lest you think it's just a European problem, Japan has a 99% cremation rate. 99%. After all, they're an island, and they're not that big of an island either. Now, it's important to note that 1% of people who do get buried pay an extreme premium for that land because it's in such high demand, because there's no land. What effect does this have, though? Well, not only are we running out of available land, people are unable to be buried or memorialized the same way their ancestors were, the same way they've grown up expecting to be buried or memorialized, or even the same way that their religion demands, which is a good segue into the second part, the underlying causes, that is, of this lack of space. The first one, like I said, religious beliefs. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the three big religions, all require that you be buried. Judaism and Christianity, both books explicitly say that you have to be buried. Islam, none of the writings say you do, but in practice it's a requirement. Now, with Christianity, the reason for that is it interferes with resurrection. It interferes with the second coming of Christ. You have to have a body for the rapture, is their purpose. With Judaism, the Torah explicitly says to bury people, like I said. Additionally, though it is highly debated whether or not you can be cremated. Lots of different synagogues have different rules about it. But many do not agree with cremation because of the Holocaust and the cultural trauma that left on their religion. So they don't tend to like cremation. Another cause of this lack of space is culture. And we're going to switch over to specifically American now. Before we were talking worldwide, now we're just talking American. Embalming is a big part of funeral culture. If you don't get embalmed, a lot of people will question that decision, ask why aren't you getting embalmed? You should get embalmed. You can't hold a visitation if you're not embalmed, sort of thing. Well, embalming dates back to the American Civil War, when people wanted their sons shipped home for the funerals, but for obvious reasons you can't really ship several unrefrigerated bodies in a train for multiple weeks and expect that to end well. It's not going to end well. So at battlefields and battle sites, many people, many doctors and scientists would set up embalming tents, and they would embalm the bodies for a certain fee, and then they'd ship the bodies home to their families, and the families could have viewings or what have you, and bury the bodies. It remained popular for the next 150 years. It's still extremely common, like I said, to be embalmed. Now, this is not great, however, because regular decomposition takes 8 to 12 years. Like, for the full body to dust, 8 to 12 years. And that's if you're just put in a 6-foot deep hole with, like, a shroud. No coffin, no nothing. Just you in the dirt. 8 to 12 years. Embalming, if you're embalmed, it could take decades to decompose, if you ever decompose. And that's not really helpful when there's no space. You can't take a body out after 5 years if the body's still completely intact. Additionally, within that whole cultural concept, there's a 47% burial rate. That number has gone down over the last few years. However, it's not gone down by very much. Burial is still the number one way to be disposed of in death. So, the third cause of this lack of space is population. Like I said, baby boomers are reaching the age of their lifespans, and they make up 22% of the population. That's notable because they tend to have an expectation to be buried. They've already got their plots, they've already paid their headstones, they've already written up their wills for what they want. They expect to be buried, and we're probably going to run out of space after them, frankly. Another issue with the population is pandemics and disasters, just factually. There's only so much space, and in a disaster situation, it will be used up faster as mass graves or just quickly needing people to be buried. You're going to get more graves because there's more dead to be buried. So, having said all that, what are some alternatives to traditional burials? Well, you've got your standard cremation and urn, where you are cremated and then you're on the mantelpiece. You can rent a grave, like several countries are switching to now. I mentioned those 4. There's several other countries that are switching over to that, other than those. However, those were the 4 most notable that I found. They all tend to function under the same purpose. You rent the grave for X number of years, and then you can either continue to rent the grave until the body is decomposed, or you can get the body cremated or something. There's also green burial, which is the extremely traditional burial. You get wrapped in a sheet or a plain casket, and you are put in the ground. It's still not ideal, obviously, because you are still taking up a grave site, but it is a quicker decomposition, and that space could be more quickly used for someone else. The last, what I'm going to call traditional alternative, semi-traditional alternative, is sky burial, which consists of you being put out into a field and eaten by vultures. This one is particularly notable because not only are you not taking up grave space, you're re-entering the food chain in a way that humans aren't really part of the food chain anymore. And so you're re-entering the cycle of life in the food chain, and that's all very well and good. However, that one is a good segue into the more out there of the funeral options. You could do a bio-urn, which is where they take your ashes and they mix them with dirt, and they put you in a compostable urn, and then you purchase a tree or a shrub or something, and you plant this, and from your ashes grows a tree, which is also very circle of life. Another thing you can do is donate your body to science. You can be part of like a bodyworks exhibit, or you can go to a medical school. There's options. You could also have glass art or jewelry made with your ashes because the ashes make it sparkly. There's people who make little heart stones, like kind of like paperweights with the ashes in them, little balls, jewelry, like I said, or even glass orbs to hang from like a window. There's lots of options. The final funerary option that I'm going to talk about is recimation, which is a process which uses alkaline hydrolysis, which is water based, to cremate your body. So instead of using fire, which leaves smoke and is not necessarily great for the environment, it's much healthier for the environment. It's water-based. It's fairly gentle. However, it is important to note that alkaline hydrolysis and recimation are not legal most places for humans. It is legal some places for pet cremation. So it will likely be legal for humans in the next decade or so. So, in conclusion, grave space is running out, and in some places it already has. We've discussed today what is happening, why we're running out of room, and how we can each do our part to use less space after we die. As you see, something must be done and soon. With just a little effort on our part, we can lessen our impact even after death.